Chapter 1. The Day They Moved In. I never thought the day would come when my own son would force me into a cold garage, calling me a burden, while he and his wife plotted to sell the house I bought long before either of them could even spell the word mortgage. But the real shock wasn't the betrayal. It was what I found in an old box buried under blankets, a single deed with only my name on it, a letter from my late husband begging me to protect this home, and a hidden camera that captured every cruel word they whispered, the threats, the plan to ship me off to a facility so they could flip my life for profit. My name is Marjorie, and before I tell you how I took everything back with nothing more than the truth and a lawyer who remembered my husband, we need to go back to the day they walked through my front door, smiling like family while carrying a plan to erase me. The morning my son called, the house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming and nothing else. That is what life had become after my husband died in 2017. A small, one-story house on the north side of Spokane, Washington, filled with memories and the sound of my own breathing. I was in the kitchen, rinsing a coffee mug, when my phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with his name, Daniel. Even after all these years, my heart still did a small, hopeful jump whenever I saw it. I put the towel down and answered. "Mom," he started, and there was something heavy in his voice, something he tried to smooth over but could not. I already knew this was not just a friendly check-in. He told me he had been laid off from Northwestern Freight Logistics the previous fall. I had known that part. What I had not known was how bad it had gotten since then. The savings he and his wife had were thinner than he admitted. The credit cards were maxed out. The job prospects in his field were not what he had hoped. He said they needed to cut costs for a while. He said Spokane was cheaper than Seattle. He said it would only be for a few months, just until he got back on his feet. Behind his words, I heard something else. Shame, fear, a little of that boy he used to be when he called me from college because his car would not start. "Of course you can come," I said. "This house is as much yours as mine." It was not technically true, but it felt true when I said it. We agreed they would arrive the following weekend. His wife Paige, their son Tyler, my only grandchild, 3 extra bodies in the small house I had once shared with my husband. I told myself it would be nice to hear laughter again. The week before they came, I moved methodically through the rooms, cleaning in slow circles. The little craftsman house had been ours since 1988, bought with the money I had saved from 25 years managing a clothing store. Back then, the walls were fresh and bright, the yard a blank slate. Now the paint had softened, the wood floor creaked a bit near the hallway, and the yard was more moss than grass. But it was mine. Every stain, every nail, every picture hook in the wall carried a story. I stripped the sheets in the extra bedroom, fluffed pillows, aired out blankets. I'd cleared space in the hall closet. I made a list of meals that would stretch, the way I used to when Daniel was growing up, and Patty's seemed far apart. It felt good to have a purpose again. The day they arrived, a gray Saturday in early March, Spokane was still clinging to the last of winter. A thin frost coated the grass as their SUV pulled into the driveway, piled high with boxes and plastic tubs. I stood on the front porch and waved, like some scene from an old movie. Tyler tumbled out first, taller than the last time I saw him, and all elbows, his backpack hanging from one shoulder. Then Paige stepped out of the passenger side in a long camel coat, phone in hand, eyes already scanning the house like it was a project. Daniel climbed out last, leaner, with faint lines at the corners of his mouth I did not remember. He hugged me first, tight enough that I felt the worry in his muscles. Paige leaned in for a polite hug that smelt like expensive perfume. Tyler wrapped his arms around my waist in that unself-conscious way only kids still have. Inside, I showed them the room I had prepared, the one that used to be Daniel's as a teenager. Paige walked slowly through the hallway and living room, looking up at the ceiling, at the windows, at the narrow footprint of the place. She did not say anything right away, but I watched her eyes. She had that look I had seen on customers who came into the store, the ones who picked up every sweater and turned it over, already calculating what they would change. "It's cozy," she finally said. Her tone was light, but the words sat in the air. Cozy, not generous, not beautiful, just small. Daniel dropped a box on the floor and said it would be fine, that they were grateful, that they just needed a landing place. I believed him. I wanted to. The first couple of days passed in a blur of unpacking and shuffling furniture. Paige worked from her laptop at the dining table, juggling clients as an interior stylist. Every so often, I heard her on the phone describing bold open concepts and clean lines and modern flow. When she hung up, her gaze would drift around my old living room with its inherited oak coffee table and floral drapes, and I could practically hear the measurements running through her mind. One evening, after dinner dishes were done and Tyler had gone to play a video game in his room, Paige and Daniel stood in the hallway, talking in low voices. I was in the kitchen, wiping the counter, the sink full of cooling water. Their words floated in, soft but distinct. "If we took down that wall," Paige said, "I swear it would open the whole space. And those cabinets have to go. We could easily double the value with the right changes." Daniel murmured something I could not catch. Then Paige said more firmly that no one wanted a closed-off little box anymore, not in this market. She said it would be a waste not to maximize the place. I dried my hands deliberately, pretending not to hear, but a small stone formed in my chest. This was the first time I heard her talk about the house like a thing to be fixed and sold instead of a home. A few days later, over scrambled eggs and toast, Paige mentioned they really needed a quiet area to work. The dining table was too central, too many interruptions. She said she was lining up new clients in Spokane who wanted help staging properties for sale. She needed space to meet them, to lay out samples, to take calls. She asked almost casually if I had ever considered using the garage differently. There was a little laugh in her voice when she said it, as if it were a playful idea, nothing serious. Daniel stared at his plate. I asked her what she meant. "Well," she said, "if we took down that wall, it would be perfect for us to take meetings and build things back up. And you could set up a really comfortable spot in the garage. We could insulate it, add a rug, some lamps. It would just be temporary until things stabilize." Daniel chimed in quickly. "It would just be for a bit," he said. "You know how it is, Mom. We need to hustle right now." The words slid into me like a cold draft. This was my house, my bedroom. The idea of being pushed out of my own space and down to where the lawnmower and holiday decorations lived made my stomach tighten. For a moment, I pictured myself waking up beside the concrete floor, wrapped in old blankets, listening to their footsteps above me. I forced a small smile and said I would think about it. Paige looked relieved, as if she had already expected me to agree. Daniel exhaled like a man who had just dodged a fight. That afternoon, Tyler wandered into the kitchen when I was peeling carrots for a stew. He climbed onto a stool and told me he liked Spokane, that it felt quieter than the city they came from. Then he started chatting in that open way kids do when adults seem half busy. "Mom says once we fix up the house, we could maybe sell it for a lot. She asked her friend Nolan to look at pictures already. He sells houses here. He used to work with her on another project." I paused, the peeler in midair. I asked him who Nolan was. He shrugged. "Some real estate guy," he said. "They talked about maybe opening up walls and changing the kitchen. He said your house has good bones." Tyler looked proud, as if he had just shared good news. I nodded and finished the carrots, my hands on autopilot, while my mind spun slowly. A real estate agent. Conversations about selling, and no one had said a word to me. That night, after everyone went to bed, I stood alone in the dark hallway, the only light coming from the street lamp filtering through the curtains. The house felt different already, like it was being measured and weighed and found lacking. On the other side of the thin wall, I heard Paige whispering, her voice low and clipped. She said that they just needed her signature. She said once the papers were done, everything would be easier. She said it wouldn't be that hard, that older people signed things all the time without really understanding. The words made my skin prickle. Daniel answered softly. I couldn't catch every phrase, but I heard him say that the credit card companies were calling nonstop, that collection notices had started arriving, that he was out of time. There was desperation in his tone, the kind that made people do foolish things. I stood there with my hand on the hallway wall, feeling the faint vibration of their voices. Part of me wanted to knock, to open the door, to demand they say it to my face. Another part of me felt suddenly very old and very tired.
In the end, I did neither. I stepped back, moving quietly past the family photos on the wall, the ones that showed Daniel at 8 and 12 and 18, grinning with a baseball glove or a graduation cap. I went down the short flight of steps into the garage, flicked on the single bare bulb, and looked around. The concrete floor was cold under my slippers. Boxes lined one wall, labeled with Christmas lights and camping gear and tax records. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust. It was not a place meant to sleep. It was where you put things you didn't need right now, but were not ready to throw away. I spread an old quilt on the camp cot we kept for Tyler's overnight friends, added a pillow from the linen closet, and told myself it was just for one night, just to keep the peace until I figured out what to do. When I finally lay down, staring at the unfinished beams above me, I listened to the muffled sounds of my own house, now occupied
Other people's worries and plans. There was no anger yet, only a deep, uneasy quiet, like the air before a storm. I closed my eyes and tried to pretend that this was temporary, that in the morning things would feel clearer, that this was still my home, in more than just name. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 2. The Garage and the Truth I Didn't Want to See. In the morning, nothing felt clearer at all. My back ached from the thin cot, the concrete had sucked the warmth out of my bones, and the washing machine had kicked on twice during the night with a roar that made my heart jump each time. There was a faint smell of detergent in old paint. I sat up, rubbed my neck, and told myself that it was only temporary, that I was doing what mothers do. We adjust. When I came upstairs, Paige was at the kitchen counter making coffee in her sleek metal press, my old drip machine shoved to the side. Daniel sat at the table scrolling on his phone, shoulders hunched. Tyler ate cereal, his bowl pulled too close to the edge. I reached out and slid it in a little, an old reflex. "Morning, Mom," Daniel said without looking up. "Sleep okay?" I lied and said I slept fine. Paige gave me a quick, polite smile that did not reach her eyes. She said that she had been thinking about how to make things work more smoothly, and that with all of them in the house, it would help to have some structure. I asked her what she meant, trying to keep my tone light. She explained that since she was working with clients and Daniel was looking for jobs online, the kitchen and living room needed to stay tidy. She said it would be easier if I tried not to cook during the day, maybe just in the evenings when everyone was home. She said it would be better if we kept personal items out of the living room, so it would look more presentable if someone stopped by. The words sounded reasonable on the surface, but underneath, they carried a different message. "So you are saying I should not really be in my own kitchen during the day?" I asked, looking from her to my son. Daniel shifted in his chair. Paige laughed softly and said that of course I could use it, but that she meant quick things, nothing too messy or loud. She said that since my space was downstairs now, it might help to think of the garage as my little studio. She used that word, studio, like she was offering me something grand. I pushed down the sting in my chest and nodded. Tyler glanced between us, sensing something he could not quite name. Over the next week, the house adjusted around their needs. Paige spread fabric samples and catalogs over the dining table. Daniel took phone calls in what used to be my bedroom, now referred to as the office. I learned to move through the house quietly, to time my showers and my coffee so I did not interfere. I told myself it would be worse if they were not there at all, that silence could be its own kind of cruelty. One afternoon, I was coming upstairs from the garage just as the back door swung open. Rita Collins from next door stepped in holding a small plate covered in foil.
Rita was 63, with a sharp bob of gray hair and the kind of walk that said she did not waste time. She had a key because for years she had checked on the house when we traveled. She stopped when she saw me emerging from the garage stairwell with an empty laundry basket in my arms. Her eyes flicked down to the basket, then to the open garage door behind me. "Are you sleeping down there now, Marge?" she asked, her voice light but her brow furrowing. I forced a laugh and said I was just grabbing some seasonal decorations and that the garage was closer. I said Daniel and his family needed more space upstairs with all of their work. I could hear how thin it sounded. Rita hesitated, then held out the plate. She said she had made lemon bars and thought Tyler might like some. She looked toward the living room, where Paige was on a video call, gesturing at the walls. Then she looked back at me, her eyes searching my face. "You know you can holler if you need anything," she said quietly. I nodded, thanked her, and changed the subject. I could tell she did not believe my neat little explanation, but she let it go. For the moment. A few days later, Daniel knocked on the garage door and called my name. I was folding laundry on the cot, turning the small space into something that at least looked less like a storage unit and more like a corner of a life. I told him to come in. He had a manila envelope in his hand and that tense smile he used to wear when he came home with bad grades. He sat on the old camping chair across from me and said that he and Paige had been talking to a mortgage broker. He said there was a possibility to refinance, lower payments, pull a little equity out to give them some breathing room while he looked for work. He said it would be a win-win. He opened the envelope and slid a small stack of papers toward me. The top page was full of legal language in small print. He pointed to a line near the bottom where there was a blank for my signature. "All you have to do is sign right there," he said, trying to sound casual. "The broker said it's very standard. It will help us handle things, and of course you will stay right here. Nothing changes day to day." I picked up the page and squinted at the words. Years at the store had taught me to read return policies like my life depended on it. This was not a simple refinance document. It was a transfer of interest. The phrase, "quit claim," jumped out at me. There were words about releasing any and all rights in the property. My stomach clenched. Paige appeared behind him in the doorway, one hand on the frame. She smiled and said that the paperwork was just a formality, that everyone did it, that it would make things much easier. She said the broker told them the bank liked to see younger names on the deed. I asked if I could keep the papers overnight and go over them. I said my eyes were not as quick as they used to be, and I wanted to understand exactly what I was signing. I kept my voice soft. Paige exhaled sharply, then caught herself. She said that of course, but that they really needed to get things moving. Daniel shot her a look and told her to give me some space. After they left, I set the papers on the small folding table, looked at them a long time, then placed an old magazine over them as if that could hide them from the air. A few days later, Tyler wandered into the garage when I was sorting through boxes. He perched on the cot and swung his feet. He told me about school, about a new friend who liked the same video game. Then he mentioned that his mom had been texting Nolan, the real estate friend from the city. He said Nolan had looked at pictures of the house and told his mom that if they opened up the kitchen and painted everything white, they could probably sell for a lot more than I had paid. He said it proudly, like they had discovered hidden treasure. I kept my face still and asked when Nolan had said that. Tyler shrugged and said a few days ago. He said his mom was excited because this could be their reset. Then he asked if I would still live with them if they moved to a bigger place someday. I told him that grown-up plans could change a lot, and that I loved him very much. After he went back upstairs, I sat there alone, the word sell echoing in my mind. That night, while looking for thicker blankets in the old storage boxes at the back of the garage, I found a familiar cardboard container from decades ago. It was the box my husband and I had labeled with our original closing documents. Dust coated the top. My handwriting from 1988 stared up at me, neat and earnest. I hauled it onto the cot and opened the lid. Inside were neatly stacked folders, old tax forms, a few Polaroid photos of the house when the yard was nothing but dirt and promise. At the bottom lay the folder I was really looking for, even if I had not known it that morning. Purchase agreement, title, deed. I slipped the papers out carefully. There it was in black ink. My name, and only my name, listed as the sole owner of the property. The notary stamp from March of that year. The note from the title officer explaining that because my husband had joined me later, the house was considered my separate property under state law. We had joked back then that if anything ever happened, I would be the one in charge. It had never occurred to either of us that someone else would try to claim it. Below those papers was a letter in my husband's handwriting, dated a few months before he died. He had written that if he went first, he wanted me to feel secure, that this house was my anchor, something I had earned before him and that he respected. He wrote that he trusted me to protect it and myself. I sat very still on the cot, the furnace rumbling faintly above my head. Upstairs, I could hear the low murmur of Daniel and Paige talking, a cabinet closing, the television turning on. I looked around at the boxes, the concrete, the exposed beams, and I felt something shift inside me. Later that week, the tension finally slipped out into the open. Paige was in the front yard with Daniel, looking at the siding and pointing out imaginary flaws to fix. Rita happened to be coming home with her grocery bags. I was on the porch, sweeping pine needles. Rita called hello and joked that the house looked like it was auditioning for a home makeover.
Paige laughed and said the place was stuck in another era, that some people had a hard time letting go of old ways. She said it in a tone that made it clear she was not just talking about paint colors. I answered that the house had done just fine for nearly 35 years. Paige rolled her eyes slightly and said that sentiment could not pay bills. She added that older folks often made things harder by clinging to control when they should really be letting the next generation handle things. Daniel shifted uncomfortably but did not contradict her. The words stung more than I let show. Rita's expression tightened. She set her bags down and looked from Paige to me. She asked Paige if she realized how lucky they were to have a roof at all right now. Paige shrugged and said they would make the most of it once everything was in their names. Rita glanced at me, eyes sharp now, reading more in the scene than anyone was saying out loud. Later, I would find out she had recorded part of that exchange on her phone, more out of anger than planning. At the time, all I felt was the hot flush of humiliation. That evening, I went back down to the garage, closed the door at the top of the stairs, and sat on the edge of the cot with the box of documents beside me. I took out the deed again, ran my finger over my name, over the dates. I thought about the years I had spent working on my feet, the double shifts, the nights I fell asleep with my shoes still on, all to pay for this place. The papers crinkled slightly under my grip as I held them. The noise of the washing machine starting up filled the small space, but this time it did not make me flinch. For the first time since Daniel and Paige had moved in, I did not feel like a guest in my own life. I felt the weight of something I had almost forgotten I possessed. I felt my own authority. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 3: Their Plan and My Awakening. The next morning, I watched them move through my kitchen like they were walking through a showroom. Paige had a tape measure hooked to the waistband of her jeans, a notebook in her hand. Daniel carried his coffee and followed her from wall to wall while she rattled off numbers. She ran the tape across the length of the living room and called it out to him. 14 feet, maybe a little more if we push that wall back, she said. She pointed at the half wall between the kitchen and the living room and tapped it with her knuckles. If we take this down and do an island, it will feel so much more open. Buyers eat that up. I was sitting at the small table with my tea, the newspaper folded in front of me. I had not read a word. I watched her mark something on a pad, little squares and lines, and I realized she was drawing my home the way a butcher draws cuts of meat. Daniel nodded, trying to keep up. And the bedroom, Paige went on. If we repaint in a neutral shade and stage it right, we will get better pictures. Nolan said the photos have to pop or people just scroll past. She turned, saw me watching, and smiled. We are just brainstorming, Marjorie, she said, talking about possibilities, figuring out the best way to use the property. The way she said our property made something cold slip down my spine. This is still my house, I said quietly. I would appreciate it if you remembered that. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, she did not mean anything by it, he said. We are just trying to see options. If we can get ahead financially, it will help everyone. I looked at him, at the worry behind his eyes, and held my tongue. I folded the newspaper, stood up, and took my mug to the sink. Behind me, Paige said something about people needing to be flexible. I pretended I did not hear. That afternoon, after they left to run errands, I took the folder of documents from the garage and set it on the kitchen table. I stared at my name on the deed, at the language that said the property belonged to me alone. My heart was beating too fast. I needed someone who could translate all of this into more than just legal phrases. I needed someone who knew the law and knew me. There was one person who fit both. Henry Walker had been my husband's friend since before I met either of them. He had done our will years ago, and his office number was still written in my old address book. I dialed from the landline, my fingers a little shaky. Henry Walker speaking. Henry, it's Marjorie from Garland Avenue. I hope I'm not interrupting your day. He chuckled. Retirement means there's not much to interrupt. What can I do for you, Marge? I swallowed. I think I need some legal advice about the house. There was a pause, then a different tone in his voice, more focused. Come by the office this afternoon, he said. Same building as before, 2:00. His office downtown was in an older brick building that had not been trendy enough to get torn down. The elevator still groaned a little between floors. When I stepped into his waiting room, he rose from behind the front desk. He looked older and softer around the middle, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. Well, look at you, he said. Come in, sit down, tell me what's going on. I handed him the folder without a word. He opened it, flipped through the deed and the purchase agreement, nodded slowly. This is exactly what I remember, he said. You bought the house in '88 in your name only. You and Thomas did the joint will later, but this address was always your separate property. He looked up at me. Why the sudden interest? I told him about Daniel losing his job, about Paige, the interior stylist, about the night in the hallway, and the so-called refinance papers. The words felt heavy and ugly, coming out of my mouth. But once I started, I couldn't stop. Henry listened without interrupting, his hands steepled under his chin. When he finished, he let out a long breath. They're trying to get you to sign away your interest, he said. Those are not harmless forms. If you sign a quitclaim deed, you make it much easier for them to borrow against the house or sell it out from under you. So what do? I asked. You do not sign anything, he said, not one thing, not unless I look at it first. He leaned back and thought for a minute. And if they're pressuring you, we need proof of that. Elder financial abuse is taken more seriously now than it used to be, but it's hard to prove unless you have something more than your word. I gripped the edge of the chair. I have spent the last few weeks feeling like a guest in my own home. How much more proof do they need? He said, I believe you. The law needs more. Tell me where you're sleeping. In the garage, I said, and the shame of it washed over me again. He frowned. If they're pushing you out of your bedroom into the garage and trying to get you to sign away the house,
That's a pattern, Marge. Can you keep something like a small camera down there? Something that records what is said to you? The idea made me uneasy, but also strangely relieved. It was a way to stop feeling crazy, a way to catch on tape the tone that made me shrink. I could put it on a shelf near the stairs, I said slowly. He nodded. Do that, he said. And if they talk about the house, about moving you, about signing anything, you keep those recordings. I'll take a look at the papers they already gave you too. I want copies. When I left his office, the winter air on the street felt sharper, but my steps felt a little firmer. I wasn't just an old woman complaining at the kitchen table. I was a homeowner with the lawyer. 2 days later, Rita knocked on my back door. I opened it to find her standing there without her usual grocery bags or gardening gloves. She held her phone in one hand, her mouth pressed into a line. "Can I come in?" she asked. I nodded and led her to the kitchen. She set the phone down on the table. She said, "I did something the other day. I'm not sure if you will appreciate it or be mad at me, but I couldn't shake what she said." "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. She said Paige, out front by the mailbox. She was going on about you being stubborn and out of touch. I hit record halfway because I just didn't like the way it sounded. Rita tapped the screen, and the room filled with Paige's voice. I listened to myself being discussed like a problem to solve. "Once we get her into assisted living, we can list this place and be out of here by the fall," Paige said on the recording. "No one thinks we can get top dollar if we move fast. She doesn't need this much space anyway. It's selfish, really, hanging on to it." My own voice appeared faintly in the background, that day on the porch, saying something about history and memories. Paige's reply was clear. "Memories don't pay down credit cards. She's had her turn. It's time." Rita stopped the playback. "I thought you should have this," she said, "just in case." My first instinct was to be mortified that anyone had heard us that way. Then the humiliation turned to a low, steady anger that settled somewhere just below my ribs. "Thank you," I said. "I'm glad you did what you did." That evening, after Tyler went to bed and the television glow seeped under the living room door, I sat in the garage staring at the small black camera I had ordered online. It was no bigger than a matchbox. I placed it on the shelf near the stairs, angled so it faced the cot and the doorway, and tested it. The little light blinked to show that it was recording. It didn't take long. The next night, Daniel came down the stairs slowly, rubbing his forehead. He sat on the folding chair, elbows on his knees. I could see the boy he had been under the tired man he had become. "Mom," he said, "the card company called again today, and the car loan. They're threatening to send things to collections. I don't know what else to do." My heart twisted. I wanted to reach out and smooth his hair like I used to when he woke from nightmares. Before I could say anything, Paige's heels clicked on the stairs. She appeared behind him, arms folded. "What you need to do is stop stalling. She's sitting on the only asset we have, and we're rotting down here with her because she won't sign one piece of paper." Daniel spoke quietly. "She's my mother. It's her house." "It's our future," Paige snapped. "Do you want Tyler to watch us drown because you're too sentimental to grab the life raft? Nolan said if we wait, the market could turn, and then what? We're out of luck, all because you couldn't push a pen." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "We get her into a facility where people can actually take care of her. We take over the place and everyone is better off. She'll have nurses. We'll have a chance. You want to keep living like this in her basement until the collectors start knocking on the door?" Daniel ran his hands through his hair. "I tried," he muttered. "I brought her the papers. She wants to read everything. She's suspicious." "Then make her feel guilty. Tell her your son deserves stability. Tell her you have no other choice. If she really loved you, she wouldn't hold this over your head." Every word sank into me, jagged and hot. I gripped the edge of the cot so hard, my knuckles ached. I could see the conflict on Daniel's face, the tiredness, the confusion. I could also see him yielding, the way he always had, with stronger personalities, first on the playground, then with bosses, now with his wife. He whispered something I couldn't hear, and Paige answered, her tone softer but cold. "Then we do what we have to do," she said. "I'm not going down with this." They went back up the stairs, their footsteps fading. The little camera's light blinked in the near dark, recording everything. I sat there in the quiet after, my own heartbeat loud in my ears. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the ceiling and thought about the baby I had brought home from the hospital, about the boy who used to fall asleep on the couch, clutching a toy truck, about the teenager who promised me he would always take care of his family. Now he was a man being pulled in directions he did not have the spine to resist. By morning, my eyes burned, but my mind felt oddly clear. I took the camera from the shelf, brought it to the kitchen, and downloaded the footage onto a small thumb drive. I added Rita's audio file to the same device. Then I took the drive and the original deed into my purse. Later that day, I sat once more in Henry's office, the same worn chairs, the same faint smell of coffee and paper. I set the thumb drive and the documents on his desk without saying much. He watched me for a long moment before he spoke. "Looks like you have been busy," he said quietly. "I did what you told me," I answered. "I got proof." He plugged the drive into his computer, put on his glasses, and listened. With each passing minute, his face grew more serious. When the recording ended, he leaned back and folded his hands. "This is more than enough to start," he said. "I am going to contact a social worker I trust, named Linda Hayes. She specializes in elder issues. And I am going to speak with a police officer I know, Victor Delgado. We will document all of this properly before they push any harder." I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. "So this is not just in my head," I said. "No," he replied. "They are trying to corner you. Now they are going to find out you are not as cornered as they thought." I looked out the small window at the gray Spokane sky. Cars moved slowly along the wet street below. Somewhere across town, my son was probably scrolling through job listings while his wife sketched new kitchen layouts on my countertops. For the first time since they had moved in, I did not feel entirely alone in what I knew. I had names and faces on my side now, not just papers in a box. I closed my purse over the empty folder and stood up, ready to walk back into my house with a different kind of quiet. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Henry folded his hands. "My client wants to remain in her home," he said. "She does not wish to sign over ownership or be moved against her will." Linda looked at Daniel and Paige. "I am recommending that you both leave the residence for at least 24 hours, she said. "We need a cooling off period and a chance for Marjorie to be here without feeling pressure. After that, we can discuss what a safe arrangement looks like. If you refuse, Officer Delgado has the authority to enforce a protection plan." Daniel ran a hand over his face. "Where are we supposed to go?" he asked. "There are hotels," Henry said. "Friends, family. You are adults. You will manage." Paige shot to her feet. "This is ridiculous," she said. "We have nowhere else." "You had nowhere else before," Linda said calmly. "You still do not get to bully her in her own house." Daniel's shoulders sagged. He turned to me, eyes wet. "Mom, I am sorry. I did not mean for it to get like this. I just did not see another way." I looked at the boy I had raised, now wrapped in a man's body, wrapped in debt and fear and the influence of a woman who saw everything in square footage and profit. "I think you need some time to think," I said, "away from this place." It was all I could manage. Within the hour, they were packing bags and boxes into the same SUV that had rolled into my driveway weeks earlier. Tyler stood on the lawn, bewildered, holding a backpack. Rita went over to talk to him quietly, to make sure he understood that he had done nothing wrong. Officer Delgado stayed until the car pulled away.
Linda gave me her card and said she would check in tomorrow. Henry promised to call with next steps. Then one by one they left, their footsteps fading, the doors closing behind them. The house exhaled. I walked down the hallway alone, my hand trailing along the wall where framed photos still hung in their crooked lines. The light through the front window was soft and gold, the kind we used to call evening light. For the first time in weeks, there was no one measuring, no one pacing, no voices plotting in corners. In the living room, my husband's old recliner waited in its familiar spot. I lowered myself into it slowly, feeling the cushions give under my weight, the exact way they used to when he was the one sitting here with the remote. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. It did not feel like victory. It felt like air finally reaching my lungs after being held underwater too long. It felt like what it was before anyone tried to rename it or flip it. It felt like home. Chapter 5. Coming home to myself. A week later, the house sounded different. No footsteps above the garage at odd hours, no tape measure snapping back into its case, no muted arguments behind closed doors. There was only the hum of the refrigerator and the birds in the pine trees out front, and my own breathing moving through the rooms again. I started with the garage. It felt right to begin where everything had been squeezed the tightest. I opened the door at the top of the stairs and let in as much light as the small window would give me. The cot went back against the wall, folded and covered, the way we used to keep it for occasional guests. I swept the concrete floor slowly, filling the dustpan over and over with the gray grit that had settled while I pretended the space was something like a bedroom. Boxes got stacked neatly, labels turned outward. The laundry corner became just that again, not a place for a woman to lie awake, wondering if her own name still mattered. Upstairs, I changed the sheets on my bed and fluffed the pillows, not for anyone else, just for me. The indent in the mattress where I had not slept for weeks seemed to relax as I smoothed the quilt. I opened the curtains wider in the living room so the afternoon light fell all the way across the rug, instead of being blocked by pages, mood boards, and sample books. The house felt as if it were stretching its shoulders, remembering its original shape. On the 7th day, my doorbell rang in the late morning. When I opened it, Tyler stood on the porch with his backpack, looking smaller than I remembered. Daniel's car idled at the curb. Tyler stared at the floor and said he wanted to see me. He shuffled inside when I stepped aside. His shoulders were hunched under his hoodie, his hands tight on the backpack straps. He told me his parents were staying in a motel for now, that things felt weird, that he kept hearing them whisper in the bathroom when they thought he was asleep. Then he looked up at me with eyes that were too old for his age and said the words no child should have to say, that he was sorry for what his parents had done. He said he did not understand everything about money and houses, but he knew the way they had talked about me was wrong. I sat beside him on the couch and put my arm around his shoulders. I told him that grown-ups make mistakes, sometimes very big ones, especially when they are afraid. I told him that none of this was his fault, that I loved him the same as I did when he was a toddler in the dinosaur pajama set, demanding another story before bed. I said there were people whose whole job was to sort out situations like this, and that we were letting them do their work. He asked if he would ever stay at the house again. I said I hoped so, when the adults in his life had done some important learning. He leaned his head against my arm for a moment, and I felt the familiar weight of him, like it used to be when he was small and fell asleep on me during a movie. When Daniel came to the door to pick him up an hour later, Tyler hesitated on the porch, turned back, and hugged me so tight it almost hurt. Then he climbed into the car without looking at his father. That afternoon, the mail came, a thin stack in the box. Mixed in with the usual flyers and bills was an envelope with Daniel's handwriting on the front. I stood at the kitchen counter and turned it over in my hands for a moment before opening it. The letter inside was short but careful. He wrote that he had contacted a nonprofit debt counseling service in the city and had started attending sessions, that he was trying to understand how he had let things spiral. He admitted that he had allowed Paige's urgency and fear to drown out his own better judgment, that he had wanted to fix things quickly, even if it meant ignoring the voice in his head that had told him it was not right to use me as the solution. He did not ask for forgiveness, just said that he hoped someday we could talk when I was ready. I read it twice. There was no mention of leaving Paige or any dramatic change like that. It was not a confession wrapped in a perfect bow. It was simply my son, on paper, owning his part of the damage. Relief and sadness braided together in my chest. I placed the letter carefully in the same box as the deed, next to the papers that had started this whole storm. In the days that followed, the house slowly refilled with different kinds of voices. First came Rita, holding a plate of cookies that looked slightly lopsided but smelled wonderful. Behind her were two other women from up the block, Vivian and Carla, who had lived in their own houses nearly as long as I had. They sat in my living room with their coffee mugs and told me about a neighborhood book club they met for once a month, how they'd always assumed I was too busy or too private to join. Rita nudged me gently and said it would do all of us good to have another voice in the circle, especially one with a spine like mine. I laughed at that, but I said yes. For the first time in a while, the idea of reading something new and talking about it with people who were not lawyers or social workers sounded like exactly the kind of medicine I needed. Later, after they left, I went down to the garage and opened the cardboard box again, the one with years of documents and memories pressed together. The letter from my husband sat on top now, the edges worn from being unfolded and refolded over the years. I read it slowly, tracing the familiar loops of his writing. He had written that this house was more than wood and plaster, that it was a reflection of the life we had built and of my own persistence. He told me if I ever doubted myself, to remember how hard I had worked to stand on my own feet before him and how much he respected that. He said to guard the house the way I would guard my own well-being because the two were connected. Those sentences felt different now than when I first read them months after his funeral. Back then they had sounded like sentiment. Now they felt like instructions I had finally followed. I folded the letter and tucked it back into its place, not hiding it anymore, but storing it like something fully used. One afternoon, not long after the book club met for the first time at my dining table, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, a young woman stood there, maybe in her late 20s, with a folder clutched to her chest. Her name was Elena, and she said she had just moved into an apartment a few blocks away. Rita, apparently, had told her that if she wanted to understand how to buy a house without getting steamrolled, she should talk to me. She sat with me at the table, spreading out printouts of listings and bank brochures. Her questions tumbled out quickly. How much down payment was realistic? How to know if a lender was trustworthy? How to be sure her name would actually be on the documents the way she thought. I listened to all of it, then told her about the year I had spent saving every spare dollar from the store, the nights I had eaten toast so I could put aside a little more, the way I had read every line of the closing papers with a pen in my hand. I shared why I had learned the hard way in the last weeks too, that you never sign something you don't understand, that someone pushing you to hurry is often thinking of themselves first, that a home is not a favor, It's an agreement you enter with your eyes open. I told her that the first lesson was to know her own value before she sat across from any banker or seller. If she could see that clearly, she would be less likely to hand it over to anyone who talked fast or smiled in the wrong way. She thanked me so many times on her way out that I had to laugh. After she left, the house felt particularly bright, as if the sunlight had settled in a little deeper. At night, when the neighborhood quieted and the streetlights came on, I would make a cup of tea and sit in my husband's old chair. Sometimes I thought about Daniel and Paige in whatever temporary place they were calling home, about whether they were sitting with counselors or just sitting with their own thoughts. I wondered what kind of man my son would decide to be on the other side of all this. I hope he would choose better. Mostly, though, I thought about the strange shape that justice had taken in my life. There had been no shouting matches in front of judges, no dramatic courtroom scenes. My revenge, if you could even call it that, had been quieter. It was in saying no when everyone expected me to fold. It was in letting the law and the truth speak louder than guilt or fear. It was in taking back my bedroom and my living room and my name on a piece of paper. Sitting there with my hands around the warm mug, I realized that the sharp edge of anger was no longer the thing holding me up. What remained was something steadier, a sense that I had kept a promise to myself and to the man who had trusted me to keep this house safe. If you're still here with me at the end of this story, maybe some part of it brushed against your own life. Maybe you know what it feels like to be pushed toward the edges of your own world, or to have people you love treat you like an obstacle instead of a person. If you do, I hope what I did quietly in this little house in Spokane reminds you that standing up for yourself does not have to be loud to be real. Truth and dignity will not erase every hurt, but they are a shield no one can sign away from you. Stay a while with stories like this. Share them if they make you feel less alone. And when the next voice of a woman telling her side comes on, listen. Sometimes the calmest revenge is simply refusing to let anyone rewrite who you are. Chapter 4. The day I took back what was mine. When I pulled into the driveway that afternoon, Rita was raking along her fence line. She straightened up and shaded her eyes as I got out of the car. "How did it go?" she asked. "I have help now," I said. "Real help." She nodded once, like that was what she had expected all along. Inside, the house felt tense before I even reached the kitchen. Voices carried down the hall. Daniel and Paige were waiting at the dining table. A neat stack of papers sat in the center like a centerpiece. Daniel stood when he saw me. "Mom, can you sit down for a minute?" he said. "We need to talk." Paige stayed seated, hands folded, chin up. Her laptop was open beside her, a document glowing on the screen. Tyler was not there. They had made sure of that. I hung my purse on the back of a chair and sat. Daniel pulled out the head chair, the one my husband used to take, and positioned himself there. It was not subtle. "We have been trying to resolve this nicely," Paige began, "but we cannot stay in limbo forever. The creditors are not waiting. The bank is not waiting. We need to put things in order." She slid the papers toward me. "This is a power of attorney and a deed transfer," she said. "If you sign, we can refinance properly, fix the house, maybe even sell if we have to. It is just paperwork. You will still live here. You will be taken care of." I did not touch the pages. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, "if you refuse to sign, you leave us with no options. We talked to a lawyer, and one thing they mentioned was having you evaluated to make sure you are capable of handling this kind of responsibility. If it turns out you are not, the court can appoint someone else to make decisions about the house. I looked at my son. He could not hold my gaze for long. So that is where we are now, I said. Threats and evaluations. It is not a threat, he said quickly. It is reality. You are making choices that hurt everyone. We are just trying to make sure things are safe and fair. I sat very still. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out calm. You think I'm not capable of owning my own home? I said, the home I bought before you were out of grade school? Paige leaned forward. We think it's a lot to manage, financially, legally. There are scams, mistakes. You moved yourself into the garage, Marjorie. That alone shows you might not be thinking clearly. I almost laughed at that. They had pushed every boundary until the garage was the only place left, and now they were using it as proof I did not belong in my own bedroom. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick envelope. I placed it on the table beside their neat stack, the sound of it hitting the wood louder than I expected. I talked to my own lawyer, I said. His name is Henry Walker. You remember him. He has worked with this family for over 30 years. Their faces changed in small ways. Daniel frowned. Paige's eyes narrowed. Before they could respond, there was a soft knock at the back door. Rita's voice floated in. It's open, I called. The door swung in and Henry stepped into the kitchen, wearing his old wool coat and carrying a leather briefcase. Rita stood behind him, her lips pressed tight. Then she gave me a small nod and stayed by the doorway. Daniel stood up too fast, his chair scraping. What is this? He asked. This is me making sure my client is not railroaded in her own house. He set the briefcase on the table, opened it, and laid out a slim folder. Good afternoon, Daniel, he added. Paige? Paige tried for a pleasant expression. We're just trying to help your client. She's confused about some things. Henry opened his folder and pulled out a set of copies. They were crisp and clean despite the age of the originals. Here is the deed from 1988, he said. It shows the property at this address, purchased in the name of Marjorie Lane, sole owner. Your father joined the will later, Daniel, but his interest was never formal on this title. Under state law, this house is your mother's separate property. He tapped the page with one finger. This means she has complete authority. No one can compel her to sign away her interest. Trying to do so through pressure or threats can fall under the category of elder coercion. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. Paige recovered faster. We're not coercing anybody, she said. We are her family. We live here. We're just trying to secure our future. That should count for something. Your future cannot be built on taking away hers, and it certainly cannot be built on tricking her into signing documents she doesn't understand or want. Daniel gestured to the stack in front of him. We had a lawyer prepare those, he said. It's all legal. Henry glanced at the top page, then flicked it back down. I have no doubt someone was paid to draft these. That doesn't make them in your mother's interest. My hands were folded in my lap. I let them talk, listening to the rhythm of their voices, the way the house seemed to hold its breath. There was another knock at the back door. This one was brisk, official. Henry looked at me. That should be Linda and Officer Delgado, he said. I asked them to come by. Paige's head snapped toward the doorway.
You called the police on us? She demanded. I called in people whose job is to protect seniors when family lines get blurry, Henry said. We went back into the dining room. The house felt suddenly smaller with so many bodies in it. Linda took the chair beside me. Officer Delgado stood near the doorway, not looming, but present. Linda opened a small notebook. Marjorie, she said gently, Henry sent me some documents and recordings. Before I say anything else, I want to hear from you. Do you feel pressured regarding your home or your living arrangements? I looked at my son, then at the woman beside me. I was asked to leave my bedroom so they could have an office. I was told the garage was temporary. I was given papers I did not understand and told it would hurt everyone if I did not sign them. I have heard them talk about moving me to a facility so they can sell this place. I did not raise my voice. I just laid the facts out like cards on a table. Linda nodded and wrote something down. Have you ever told them you do not want to sign anything? She asked. More than once, I said. Daniel pushed his chair back and stood. It is not like that. We are under a lot of stress. We're just trying to survive. Henry reached into his briefcase again and took out a laptop. He set it in the center of the table and turned the screen toward them. I think it is time we let everyone hear it in your own words, he said. He clicked a file. Paige's voice filled the room, clear and sharp. It was the recording from the garage. She told Daniel they needed to get me into a facility, that I was sitting on the only asset they had, that if he really loved his son, he would push me. She called me stubborn. She said memories didn't pay down debts. On the screen, the second file appeared. Rita stepped forward and handed her phone as well. I have one too, she said, from outside the other day. Paige spun on her. You recorded me? She snapped. I did, Rita answered. You forget. Sound carries. The second recording played. Paige talked about selling the house by fall, once I was out of the way, about Nolan's estimate, about how I had my turn. My own voice chimed in softly, then hers again, dismissing me. Silence settled after the file ended. Daniel's face had gone pale. Paige stared at the table, jaw clenched, a bright spot of color on each cheek. Linda closed her notebook. This is exactly the kind of pattern we look for. Pressure regarding assets, threats of institutionalization, attempts to isolate or displace. It doesn't matter if the intentions are dressed up as concern. The impact is the same. Officer Delgado spoke for the first time. I'm not here to arrest anyone today, but I am here to make sure Miss Lane is safe in her own home. If there is reason to believe that safety is compromised, we can require certain boundaries be respected.